Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today's video, it kind of speaks to an analysis of race or looking at Brazil from a perspective of race, and in some ways it doesn't, just depends on how you look at it. I want to talk a little bit about the popularity and the validity, accuracy, or lack thereof of all of these DNA tests that people are taking. They've become increasingly popular over the last decade to 15 years or whatever. It's made these DNA testing companies millions, maybe, I don't know, billions of dollars, with the increase of popularity and the belief that people put in these, in these test kits. My question is always, okay, how accurate are these tests? Should we really be, investing so much of our emotional, I don't know, convictions into these tests? How much do they really tell us about who we are and who our ancestors were? I'm the first part of this video is going to be based on the DNA test that I saw. I've been wanting to do a video about this for some years. Um, back in 2000, I think 2006, there were some popular tests with some popular African Americans that came out. It was hosted by popular professor Henry Louis Gates, and he interviewed a number of, at the time, African American celebrities or just, popular figures and discussed with them their ancestral breakdown. Right. But then the next year in 2007, they started doing some of the tests over in Brazil as well. So, I was curious. I remember the first time I saw some of the results, and they were kind of intriguing. There's sometimes when you see somebody's DNA analysis and say, okay, I can see that being true. And there's others that just kind of raise your eyebrows. There were a couple of people that I looked at and I says, okay, I'm not going to say it's impossible because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a geneticist, but either way, it still just raised my eyebrows a bit. So let's talk a little bit about this. This is going to be kind of a long form video. Hope you find interest in this video because it was definitely interesting for me. Something, like I said, I've known about the test with, Black Brazilians since 2007. I'm just really doing a video on it today for the first time. So according to analysis, Daiane dos Santos, the popular gymnast, is 39.7% African, 40.8% European, and the popular singer Neguinho da Beija-Flor is 67% European. Are DNA tests to be trusted or are they a scam? That is the question that I'm asking. And I'm just saying, let's look at some of the evidence. I say whenever something like this comes out, you definitely want to take it with a grain of salt, and I'm going to show you why. So before I get into the video, definitely like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, click on the notification bell, and let's get directly into this because, as I said, I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. I just think this is going to be a longer video today. So Daiane dos Santos here. This picture is probably from about 20 years ago. This is a Neguinho da Beija-Flor. And as I said, their racial breakdown is kind of okay. Okay, she's supposedly more European than she is African, and he's 2/3 European. Okay, so why am I discussing this today? Because we know that Brazil is known for having a large mixed race population. Even with people who identify themselves as preto, meaning black, pardo, meaning brown or mixed, branco, meaning white, índio, meaning Native American, Native Brazilian. These color associated terms have nothing to do with any type of racial purity because every one of these groups has mixture from different groups if you are to believe the DNA studies is out there. I'm not going to say I put any stock in any of these DNA tests. It's just you can look at the people and say, okay, these people are mixed. Even the people who are darker skinned, who you would see as black, they have mixed ancestry. The people who are pardo are mixed. Some of them are just racially indefinable. Some lean more towards the white side, some lean more towards the black side, some lean more towards the Indian side. So, people who consider themselves white in Brazil may not be white in the United States because people can look at them and say, yeah, okay, you're close to white, but you're not quite white. Okay. So we have to take any color associated category in Brazil with a grain of salt because how a person identifies themselves according to color may not match with how somebody else classifies them. This comes into play when we start talking about affirmative action policies, which have been going strong in Brazil for about 24, 25 years. There was always a question of how can we do quotas in Brazil when so many people are mixed? How do we define where black ends and white starts, vice versa? What do we do with pardos? Mixed or brown people? How do we deal with all of these issues? This is something that has come up frequently when I talk about. There's probably been thousands of cases of fraud, of people who have for years probably identified themselves as white, but they want to get into college through the affirmative action program, and all of a sudden they become black or brown. This woman was accused of fraud, even though she really doesn't look black. This woman was disqualified from an affirmative action program, even though somebody could define her as black or brown. This guy's got red hair. He's clearly white, but he says his grandmother is black. Another case of fraud, and on and on. Court declares one must look like an African descendant in the eyes of the average man to qualify for affirmative action, rejecting another case of a white student passing for black. And it just goes on and on. Where do you cut somebody off for what are you considering white and what's not? What do you deal with a person who looks, for all intents and purposes, he looks mostly white, but he still is mixed? It's a question that's been it's been difficult for like judges in Brazil to deal with this topic, and it's always a controversy. Well, this guy is white to me, but the other guy says, no, this guy is brown. This guy is white in Brazil, but in the United States, he would not be white. So how do you judge who's qualified to be able to take advantage of the affirmative action program? Okay. I've talked about the introduction and popularity of these DNA tests. It's not just in the US. People in Brazil are increasingly doing these tests. They really got popular again, as I said, in 2006 with the Henry Louis Gates hosted documentary, African American Lives, like part 1 and part 2. Then later he started doing tests with people who are considered white in the United States. But the question for me has always been, how accurate are these tests? Should we be putting 100% stock in what these tests say? So literally, if I take a test tomorrow and that test says I'm 80% European, am I supposed to actually, I'm 80% white? Okay, well, I'm gonna start taking advantage of the benefits I might have for being white, even though I don't look like it, right? So let's just get into this, because like I said, there's gonna be some time to go through all of this. Let's talk about Neguinho da Beija-Flor. Everybody in Brazil who's just familiar with samba and carnaval is gonna know who this guy is. I mean, just take a look at what he looks like. Neguinho da Beija-Flor is a popular Rio-based samba singer based in Rio. He proclaims his skin color in his stage name, Neguinho, which means basically little black man, while Beija-Flor refers to the famed samba school that he's associated with. But Neguinho's name or music isn't what I want to discuss. In 2007, Neguinho and other well-known Black Brazilians took part in the Raízes Afro-Brasileiras, or Afro-Brazilian Roots Project, a study that meant to reveal the DNA breakdowns of the participants. Although all of the results were intriguing, the results of Neguinho and another Brazilian really caught my eye. The other person being the champion gymnast Daiane dos Santos, who made a name for herself in the early to mid 2000s after winning a number of gold medal and bronze medals in world gymnastics championships. According to the analysis, 67.1% of Neguinho's DNA came from Europe, while 31.5% came from Africa, with the remaining 1.4% being American Indian ancestry. 67.1% European. Okay, take a look at this guy. As we're talking about Brazil, I wouldn't be surprised if Neguinho had European ancestry, but 67.1%? So 2/3 of Neguinho's DNA is of European origin. Okay. It's not just me. Neguinho himself was also surprised. European? Me? A Negão like this? Like, a straight up black man like me? He said as he pointed to himself and laughed with a bit of suspicion of the test results from the study conducted by Brazilian geneticist Sergio Danilo Pena from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. I'll go by the color of the skin, said Neguinho. If I say I'm 67% European, people will think I'm joking, said the musician and father of two. Then we have Daiane dos Santos here. She was one of perhaps the first Black women to make a name for herself in gymnastics. It was always a sport that they considered only white girls should participate in. Of course, we know that Rebecca Andrade has won numerous medals over the last, 6 to 8 years. She came behind Daiane. She was inspired by Daiane, and she blew up at the Olympics, right? But For geneticist Sergio Danilo Pena, Daiane's analysis showed her to be the prototype of the Brazilian. According to the same study, the DNA breakdown of the gymnast from southern Brazil is 39.7% African, 40.8% European, and 19.6% Amerindian. Of the 9 individuals whose DNA was analyzed, Daiane's profile with its balanced proportions most represented the 3 main racial groups that made up the origins of the Brazilian people. Even being a bit surprised by the results, Dos Santos said she was proud of the diversity in her family as it showed a little of each of the 3 original races. In relation to the findings, Dos Santos revealed that her mother's part of the family was very strange, saying she has a blonde, an Indian, a redhead, and black cousins. It's all mixed up. It's like Brazil. No one is pure from anywhere. It's a mixture of races. Even seeing the mixture for Daiane, it was the European composition that was the biggest surprise for her. Regardless of the results, the gymnast affirmed that she continues to see herself as a descendant of Africans. I think because of the color of the skin, she said. The important thing is that we are all Brazilians, she added. Her sister Cynthia, however, saw the results with a crooked eye. She asked, European? As she looked at her famous sister. Daiane also revealed that she, in fact, knew of a little of her family's indigenous side. She said that her maternal great-grandmother was Indian, that she came from either Uruguay or Paraguay. Thinking about the topic, the champion said that her great-grandmother was from a tribe and ended up in Brazil's south in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Okay, so these are some covers from the Henry Louis Gates hosted documentaries or docuseries on PBS, African American Lives Part 2. I'm sure you've all have seen some of these images and people being surprised by the results of their test. You know, they did, Oprah Winfrey. I see Chris Tucker, Whoopi Goldberg, Don Cheadle, Chris Rock, Morgan Freeman, Tina Turner, Maya Angelou, just a number of African Americans. And then I think beyond that, there were other studies that came out. I think I saw one with like Tyra Banks and, other popular and well-known African Americans, all with the breakdown, African, European, Native American, in some cases, Asian. So, I'm sure all of you have seen these popular DNA tests. But again, the question is, how valid, how accurate are these tests? It's funny because Henry Louis Gates hosted this series and then he started doing DNA studies on famous white Americans. So it's curious, a comment that I found from Henry Louis Gates recently. I'm going to get into that a little later, but let's keep this moving. So 9 Black Brazilians were tested back in 2006 or 7. I know the results came out sometime in 2007. This is actress Ilgi Silva. Okay. She says no one knows how to define her, says the Black actress who is 70% European according to her DNA. Ilgi Silva's DNA breakdown says she's 71.3% European, 19.5% African, 9.3% American Indian. Then we have the famed legendary singer Milton Nascimento. Milton Nascimento was I think he's about 82 now. According to the test, he is 99.3% of African origin. Okay. Then you have another popular singer, Sandra de Sá. She says she's proud of being almost 100% African. Her DNA showed that she was 96.7% African origin, 2.1% European, and 1.1% Amerindian. Okay, again, intriguing. She's almost, according to those tests, again, it appears that Sandra de Sá is almost, purely African, right? Then you have popular singer Seu Jorge. His DNA analysis says 85.1% of his genes are African, while 12.9% are European, with the rest, I'm assuming, being like Native American. What is that going to be? Let's see, it's 87. So is it probably about 12? No, let me see. You got 97, maybe 90, 98. Well, I guess like the last 2% of his DNA would be Native American. I'm assuming that's what it says. 85.1 African, 12.9 European, and the rest, I'm assuming, being Native American. So George is, his DNA says he's very much African. Then you have another popular singer, Djavan. Djavan's DNA study says he's 65% African, 30.1% European, 4.9% American Indian. Then you have popular activist Fore Davi, who his DNA breakdown says he's 68.2% African, 30.8% European, and 1% American Indian. It was intriguing because I did a story about Fore Davi maybe last year, the year before, where early in his life, he denied being black. He saw himself as being white with like a suntan. It took him going to this school and a Brazilian of German ancestry to tell him, dude, you're a black man. You know, what don't you see? And today, Frei Davi is one of the biggest activists in Brazil. He's helped perhaps tens of thousands of black and, we'll say humble people from, poor backgrounds be able to get into university, right? So that's Frei Davi's genetic breakdown. Again, according to the test, I have to keep on going with this. With all of the debate going on in Brazil over who should and who should not qualify for quotas and affirmative action policies, seeing these DNA results simply added to the already complex topic. We had already seen perhaps thousands of cases of fraud in which people who lean more to their European phenotype suddenly became pardo or even preto in order to be able to have access to college. In a country like Brazil, where so many people have ancestral mixtures of 2, 3, or more racial backgrounds, DNA tests open up yet another can of worms. I have to admit, I became fascinated with the studies. I mean, who wouldn't like to delve into their own family's past to come face to face with their history and origins? I mean, it sounds fascinating to me. But then somewhere along the way, questions began to arise. I remember reading some years ago in a dissertation, a woman argued that it was more valid to trust the oral histories of people rather than simply relying on the supposed science of DNA testing. I cannot remember the name of that dissertation. I have it in my file somewhere. I'm going to have to find that. But the researcher went as far as to say that based on the area of Oklahoma that she was studying and the oral history, it would have been nearly impossible for African Americans in that particular area of the state to not have Native American ancestry. She says the two groups had been together for, decades. She would have been surprised. The DNA tests that they were showing that, and equal to the African American Lives documentary by Henry Louis Gates, like, no, Black people have almost no Native American heritage. Of course, now there's another angle that we're looking at this discussion in terms of Africans coming to the Americas before being brought on slave ships. It becomes a question of who are natives to American and what those phenotypes look like. That whole discussion is shifting. I don't have time to focus on that today because I still got a lot to get through. The proof she provided was quite convincing. And as I said, Henry Louis Gates went out of his way, whether it's true or it's not, it seemed like with some of the African Americans he was interviewing, he seemed like he was going out of his way to take away the possibility that African Americans could have Native American ancestry. Okay. I'm like, why is he doing that? He wanted to make sure that African Americans in the study knew that they had a significant contribution of European genes, but they wanted to dismiss anybody who had Native American ancestry. It's like, that's an old myth. I know many of us have families where your mother or your grandmother, your great grandmother told you, like, yeah, we got Native American heritage. I mean, why is that not possible? I saw a video several weeks ago where famous rapper Flavor Flav was saying how he and another popular rapper, LL Cool J, he could tell exactly what Native American tribe his family was from. Are we supposed to dismiss what Flavor Flav said? I'm not going to get into the argument here. I'm just talking about what's being said up until this point and this idea that DNA studies are 100% accurate. Okay. Looking at the African American Lives documentary hosted by Henry Louis Gates, it seemed to me that he was going out of his way to dismiss the idea that African Americans had any connection to Native American populations. Having read the book Black Indians, a Hidden Heritage by William Loren Katz, I wonder why Gates seems so ready to connect African Americans to European ancestry, but not Native American. What's up with that? The question of Africans in the Americas, what it seems to be, what it means to be Native American and pre-European history in the Americas have opened even further debates on this topic. Looking at the sides, the American and the Brazilian, to me, it seemed that one side, the American, was trying to eliminate the possibility of ancestral ties between so-called Blacks and so-called Indians. While on the other hand, the Brazilian side was trying to show that Pretos and Pardos were too mixed to be considered Black. That's just what the numbers seem to be telling me. And the studies that I've seen in the articles that came out saying Pardos are this amount of European ancestry. So basically arguing that they're a completely separate group away from the group that's considered Preto. Pardo being brown mixed, Preto being specifically Black. But when you look at it, if you're going to argue, to me, that's a kind of a backwards argument, because as we'll see, Pardos and Pretos in Brazil, according to these DNA studies, both have significant European ancestry, if those studies are to be believed. Now, what I'm saying is, as much time as I spend in Brazil, I see a huge, black and brown population, and in the white population, all three groups, and the Indian groups, they all have this mixture. All I'm saying is that we can't necessarily say that the science is there to tell us you're 75% this, 12% that, and 13% that. Is the science there? So, in essence, if you're going to believe the DNA studies, it says that Pretos and Pardos are both significantly European. That means both sides are mixed. Again, do we put full stock in the DNA test? Because if we show that these DNA tests are not 100% accurate, it puts a dent in the whole argument. Let's keep going though. Indeed, if one were to consider the reports that were released, one could very well come to that conclusion. While some of the first DNA tests coming out of Brazil would report that Pardos, meaning mixed or brown Brazilians, were 80% European according to their DNA analysis. Well, if we're to believe that. But according to a 2014 genetic study, Brazilians who classified themselves as Pardo had 64.7% European ancestry, 25.5% African, 10% indigenous. The same study showed that those who said they were white or branco had 84.6% European ancestry, 9.7% African, 5.6% indigenous, while those who were considered preto or black were 53.6% African, 38.1% European, and 8.3% indigenous. So all three groups are considered mixed, but we noticed that previously, where Pardos were said to be 80% European, another test made some years later showed 64.7% European ancestry. I'm just saying, why the widely varying results, and are DNA tests, believable? Are they completely accurate? Let's keep moving. Thus, according to these numbers, Brazilian Pardos were more than twice as European as they were African, and those defined as pretos were themselves mulattoes, being only a little more than half African. No way to argue against that, right? Well, now, not so fast. As I said, with more and more information coming out, I've learned that you can't always just simply, quote unquote, believe the science, because as a number of experts have said on the topic, the science simply is not there. I think we should all know this by now. Still don't believe this? Well, in the following quotes that I'm using, let me highlight the views of critics on this subject. Let's take an article from the Popular Science website, for example, where it reads, a lot of people read their DNA test like a pie chart. You're 25% this, 50% that, but that's not at all what the statistics represent. Pay attention to this. They are fractions. Estimates is saying that your genome has a certain percent estimate of representing a certain area, says Marcus Feldman, a professor of biological sciences at Stanford University and director of the Morrison Institute for Population and Resource Studies. A lot of people read their DNA test like a pie chart, which I just said that. They are fractions, they are estimates, which I just said. Feldman explains that when it comes to people's roots, the tests are saying something more like, we're 30% confident that your DNA indicates ancestry from Okinawa, Japan. That's not the same as saying someone is 30% Okinawan. Listen to what he said. I'll repeat that. We're 30% confident that your DNA indicates ancestry from Okinawa, Japan. That's not the same as saying someone is 30% Okinawan. The DNA test people who release these results don't explain that, so people take it literally as my DNA breaks down in a pie chart. And this guy is saying that's not how you look at a DNA test. DNA tests like 23andMe pack a strong European bias because they're based on genetic research that's largely from one continent. In fact, the original samples analyzed by the Human Genome Diversity Project didn't include any samples from North America. Listen to that. They have a strong European bias because they're based on genetic research that's largely from one continent. There's another way that seems to be influenced, and you have a larger database coming from Europe than you have in other places. How much influence does that have on the results? While efforts have been made to produce more geographically representative samples, at-home DNA tests still give far more detailed answers about European ancestry than most parts of the world. Keep that in mind as we're saying that Pardos and Pretos in Brazil have this large percentage of European DNA. I'm not saying it's absolutely not true, but what I am saying, it is questionable to release studies like this and let people believe I'm 30% that, 40% that, 15% that, 15% that. The science isn't there, which not only are they deceiving people by how these statistics should be analyzed and interpreted, is also drawing from a large database where Europe is the largest database that they have. Let's keep moving on. Taken from the Scientific American website, Adam Rutherford writes, to say that you're 20% Irish, 4% Native American, or 12% Scandinavian is fun, trivial, and has very little scientific meaning. It's fun, trivial, and has very little scientific meaning. We all have thousands of ancestors, and our family trees become matted webs as we go back in time, which means that before long, our ancestors become everyone's ancestors. Humankind is fascinatingly closely related, and DNA will tell you little about your culture, history, and identity. Taken from the Tufts Now website, Sheldon Kremski told us that we don't really know the accuracy of these tests because the methods of the DNA testing companies are not validated by an independent group of scientists, and there are not agreed upon standards of accuracy. So you have to look at the percentages you receive back with skepticism. Kremski continued, the results are in no way definitive. Instead, each company uses common genetic variations as the basis for saying the probability is that 50% of your DNA is, for example, from North Europe and 30% is from Asia, based on how it compares to the information in its database. However, if you send DNA to a second company, you might get different results because it has a different database. Let's keep moving. The next thing that Kremski says speaks volumes when we consider the results of Neguinho da Beija-Flor, who I showed you his photos earlier in this article. He said, it's also quite possible for someone who is African-American to get ancestry test results that say they are 75% European. That's because the chosen ancestry information markers reflect only a small percentage of our DNA. And there's actually more genetic diversity within the African population than between the African population and a European population. I happen to see a PDF file where people were discussing this with the guy who's talking, Kremski. And there was an African-American girl in the group. Now, I didn't see what she looked like, but she identified as African-American, and she said that her DNA report said she was 75% European, which is exactly what he's talking about here. So what does this say about Neguinho da Beija-Flor? Let's keep moving. If all of this is not enough to convince you that these tests should really be seen as for entertainment purposes only, consider the words of Henry Louis Gates, Rick Kittles, and Hank Greeley. Most of us already know Henry Louis Gates, but for those who don't know, Rick Kittles is a geneticist and biologist, a co-founder of African Ancestry Incorporated, a private company that provides DNA testing services for tracing African genetic lineages. Henry Hank Greeley chairs the steering committee for the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics and directs the law school's Center for Law and Biosciences. First, check out what Henry Louis Gates has to say. He's the very guy who has told numerous prominent African Americans as well as white Americans about their ancestry from a supposed position of authority. Apparently, it's showing that he himself, the video that I saw apparently shows that he himself doesn't actually believe in the accuracy of the test. What's funny about Henry Louis Gates is that from what I understood, he took numerous of these DNA tests and they kept finding that when they traced his ancestry back to Africa, they found matches for his DNA in several parts of Africa, which is the whole point here. The other thing that I found intriguing about Henry Louis Gates is they basically found, according to the DNA studies, that his DNA was 50% African and 50% European. Okay. I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm just saying, can we put stock in these DNA tests? We saw another lady. Let me get to what Henry Louis Gates first said, because I saw this in a video and I was kind of like blown away, because this same guy who's acting as an expert in DNA studies, telling people you're not this and you're not that, you're this and this is accurate. But listen to what he said in front of, he did a lecture from a podium, and you hear people, talking about this in the background, or people are reacting, and he's making a joke about this. So listen to very carefully what he said.
5,000 people or something, and she announced that she just had the test and that she was Zulu. So it broke on CNN. I was sitting in my living room minding my own business and said, Oprah Winfrey's a Zulu. So I called Rick Kittles and I said, Rick, did you tell Oprah she was a Zulu? He goes, no, man, she made that up herself. It's a true story. It's a true story. I would lie to make you laugh, but I'm telling you a true story. So I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her Zulu, man. You know? I said, you back there making it up anyway. Don't nobody believe you can take some spit and figure out a tribe? What, are you crazy?
So listen to what Henry Louis Gates said. He's actually joking, like, he doesn't believe you can just take some spit and put it on this little tube and it's going to tell you what your ancestry is. After pushing this on African-American lives and then analyzing white Americans, it's clear that Henry Louis Gates himself doesn't even believe in these tests. Very intriguing coming from somebody who was pushing this as just something that's 100% accurate. Let's check out the next video here. In the next clip, we find an African-American woman who was ecstatic in finding her DNA report until she took other tests that gave her distinctly different results. I'm going to let this play from a 60 Minutes episode from some years ago. Check this out.
There's a place in Africa you could say that I'm from. A tribe. I am thrilled. It puts a name, a place, a location, a people. It opens up such possibilities.
But the problem is, Sierra Leone wasn't the only answer Vi got. A company called Relative Genetics found a match to a single person in the Wobi tribe in the Ivory Coast.
Different? Different. Now, I got all excited about that, and this is different. Now, how could that happen?
Then a third company, Trace Genetics. Your particular sequence matches sequences reported among multiple Mendenka individuals in Senegal.
What's up with this?
And Family Tree DNA, the company that linked Vi with Marion in the first place, came up with a whole list of matches. This goes on and on.
My goodness.
So what do we know about Vi's ancestry? The DNA does indicate that she has distant relatives in the Mende tribe. But she also has relatives in all those other tribes. So no one can say for sure where Vi's maternal ancestor actually came from.
Finally, check as Professor Greeley tells us that the science simply isn't there. And then Rick Kittles as he explains just how much these tests can actually tell us about our DNA. Listen to this. Listen very closely.
When I handed Vi the certificate, she got extremely emotional about it. She wept. And it meant so very much.
People want to believe.
They want to believe they've gotten an answer.
And it's not fair of us to let them believe that we're giving them certain answers because scientifically, we just can't.
Hank Greeley is concerned that the science isn't really there yet for you to be giving them the name of a tribe.
I think for most companies, I would be concerned too.
But what about your own company?
We have
He
the
didn't
largest,
exclude you. He included you.
but we have the largest set of sequences from Africa, and so with that, we're able to provide some level of probability in terms of frequency.
But he would say that even though you have the largest database, it's still small on the scope of things.
As I said, I share those concerns.
About yourself.
Our DNA.
And that's the rub. This business of genetic genealogy is fraught with limitations. For one thing, it can only provide information about a tiny fraction of our ancestry. Because we get half our DNA from our mothers and half from our fathers, almost all of our DNA gets shuffled and remixed every generation, making it impossible to trace what comes from whom. There are just 2 bits of DNA that remain pure: the Y chromosome, which passes directly from father to son, and something called mitochondrial DNA, which passes unchanged from mother to child. Hank Greeley, a law professor at Stanford University, has studied this new field. He worries that people don't realize just how many ancestors they actually have.
8 generations ago, both you and I had 256 great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents.
Wait, you're saying that if you go back 8 generations, we have 256 great-great-great-grandparents?
Yes, it doubles every generation. So you've got 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and it adds up fast. It adds up so fast, in fact, that if you go back 20 generations, you've got over 1 million grandparents.
1,048,576 to be exact. And in each generation, DNA testing can provide information about only 2 of them.
So you could be Peruvian on your mother's 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 side, Japanese on your father's 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 side, Swedish on everything else.
And you'll never know.
And you'll never know the Swedish from the Y chromosome or the mitochondrial DNA.
Now, you've looked at several of these companies that are doing these tests.
Yes.
Do you think that they explain what you just explained to us?
No, I don't think any of them does as good a job of pointing out the limitations. But, businesses often don't go around telling you how weak their product is.
We don't oversell. I mean, we just say, look, we provide a service. If you're interested in exploring a tiny bit of your DNA and trace its ancestry, we can do that.
When you say it's a tiny little amount,
It's less than 0.1%.
and that's pretty teeny.
Yeah, but for people who know nothing about any of them, I think it's very important.
So what do you get from what Greeley and Kittles is saying? Okay. What I get from it is that they're making millions of dollars with these tests. And listen to the statistic that he broke down. Let me repeat what Kittle said. He said 0.1% is what these DNA tests can tell you about your ancestry. 0.1%. Now, with that said, you can draw your own conclusions about your own DNA results or those of famous Black Americans, Black Brazilians, or whoever. And I will repeat, for entertainment purposes only. Anyway, that's what I have for today. Want to know what you thought about today's video. Definitely want to get a conversation started about this. Drop a comment in the comment section. Like this video, share this video. Consider subscribing to this channel. Click on the notification bell so that you receive more videos as I post them. With that said, I'm going to end this video here and request that you all come back. Check out the next video that I post here at Black Brazil Today.